Last time we talked a little bit about survey methods, kind of broadly speaking, and today we'll get to talk about some specifics, like different types of survey questions. We'll be talking about some basic principles of survey construction. So, somebody's having fun outside.
Fridays.
Yeah.
Well, classes are out there. Let's do it. They want us.
We should go do a survey.
Yeah.
Or we could just
Yeah.
watch.
That's an idea, but we got to finish this stuff. Observational data. That is good stuff. There are always valuable opportunities out there for that.
We always get some Rita's lab.
Well, I mean, if you want to skip lab today and go do that, we're working on the papers, so you could, but I don't really advise that. So. But anyway, we got to finish this stuff, and once we're finished with this is the last chapter in our book. So.
Is it exam review after this?
We'll have one day, or maybe a little more, of exam review, and we'll also have a day or two where we're talking about presenting research in APA style and some different tips that might help you out with the paper. All right, but anyway, we'll be talking about principles of survey construction, and we'll also talk about some problems that you might run into when working with survey data. Now, the first step in doing survey research is, of course, creating an effective survey that's actually going to measure what you need it to measure. Now, the goal of survey research, like most research, is to try to answer an empirical question. So, does anybody remember what is an empirical question? This is going way back to the beginning of the semester.
Is it like,
Go for it, you got it.
isn't it like, it's a question that you can argue?
Well, I mean, philosophers argue over a lot of different questions, but they're not necessarily empirical questions.
Is it like a question that you can prove with like concrete evidence?
Yeah, it's a question that can be answered using data. If you recall, we went through a bunch of different examples of empirical questions and non-empirical questions, like, are people fundamentally good? That's not really an empirical question, but you can answer more specific questions about whether people will help others in certain situations and things like that. So, the important question that you need to ask yourself when you're designing a survey is, based on my research question, what type of data would help to generate answers to that empirical question? Now, this is important because the types of questions that you ask on the survey are going to determine the type of data that you get. And the best researchers will actually plan out exactly how they're going to test their hypotheses before they collect their data. So they'll already even have a planned statistical technique that they know they're going to use based on the data that they are planning to collect. And that's actually part of the paper that you're doing, is you're designing your study, and then you need to know what statistical method you would use to analyze these data if you were to collect them. Now, let's talk about some different types of survey questions. Well, some surveys will use open-ended questions. Can anybody tell me what an open-ended question is? What's that?
Be interpreted in a way.
Well, not necessarily. That can actually be a problem that we'll talk about. It's not a question that can be interpreted in any way.
Maybe like ways that they would recycle or something like that.
So you're given an example of like a specific type of empirical open-ended questions.
Yeah,
Saying,
like,
what would you do to recycle?
I mean, just different things that recycling would do. I guess some people are more likely to recycle certain things than others, but I mean, almost everybody might recycle something.
Yeah, so that would be an example of an open-ended question, saying, what types of things do you recycle?
It's one that you can't answer with yes or no.
Yeah. It's a question that doesn't have a specific answer, like yes or no. It doesn't really use a scale of any type, so people are really free to answer with answer however they want to answer. So with the example that Rebecca just gave of what do you recycle, or do you recycle? Well, people could answer that in a lot of ways. They could just maybe give you a yes or no answer, but if you ask what do you recycle, well then they could answer in a variety of different ways and give you a fair amount of detail. And so the example that I'm going to be going with here is if you were investigating helpfulness, you could ask someone, how often do you do volunteer work? And you could get a wide range of responses to this. And that is one of the big benefits of the open-ended questions, is that you can see what possible answers people might give. So you're really not limiting your participants. You're letting them tell you whatever they want to tell you. Incidentally, sometimes they'll do this anyway. If you have a survey that uses some of the closed or more structured items that we'll be talking about next, occasionally you'll get participants that'll write things off in the margins if you're doing a paper and pencil based survey. And so those can always be interesting too. Now, open-ended questions are also useful if you're really interested in qualitative data. So there's this distinction between qualitative and quantitative data. Qualitative data is much more descriptive, and you can analyze it in any number of ways, but you're usually going to get more detail. You're looking at the quality of someone's response rather than, say, a quantity of behavior. And these open-ended questions are used a lot in pilot studies. So if you're planning to do a really detailed survey, you might start off by creating a survey that uses a lot of open-ended questions and giving it to a small sample, seeing what type of answers you typically get, and then designing some more structured items based on those answers in the pilot study. Okay. So, any questions about the open-ended types of questions? Okay. So again, the key thing is that participants have a little bit more freedom in how they answer these. Okay. Now, what's probably even more common that you see in surveys is closed questions or structured items. And so an example of a structured item would be, have you done volunteer work in the past year? And people just answer yes or no. Now, you can see there's much less freedom in how you would respond to that. You've only got two options, yes or no. And so this will provide you with the ability to answer one very specific empirical question. What proportion of your sample has reported that they have done volunteer work in the past year? Whereas with an open-ended question, you could answer a lot of different questions potentially using the wide variety of answers that you got. Now, another example of a type of closed or structured question that would get the same thing is just giving people some answer options. So saying, how many hours of community service work have you done in the past year? And as you can see, you're getting some additional detail here, giving people options of 0, 1 to 5, 6 to 10 hours, 11 to 20, or more than 20. You could also just give people a space where they write how many hours of community service work they've done, or they estimate how much they've done. And although that seems like it's open-ended, the question still asks for a specific number of hours. So it's really more closed by nature. So let's see. Now,
are there surveys that require a specific answer? Like if you were to have intelligence measuring questions on a survey. I mean, is that a multiple type survey or what?
Well, that's a type of structured question. They usually, well, I mean, I'm not overly familiar with intelligence tests. That's not really my area of expertise, but
it's not a full intelligence test, but it had intelligence in it.
yeah, I mean, you can measure intelligence using open-ended or structured questions, really. I mean, you can measure any construct usually with any of these types of questions. You just have to know which question is most appropriate for the specific empirical question you're trying to answer with that data. Now, another thing, oh yeah, so this is useful for getting really specific qualitative data. Like I said, quantitative data. Like I said, quantitative deals with getting specific measurements, some quantity of behavior. All right. Now you all have done quite a few surveys in this class and probably outside of class before. And what have you seen on a lot of those surveys? How are the questions structured? There's some specific way that a lot of the questions on these psychological surveys are structured.
0, 1, 2, 3, like some of you strongly disagree or agree, or you're just like argue.
Yeah, there's a scale that's used on a lot of those. And what's that scale called? Anybody know? Yeah, Likert scale. So that's what we're going to talk about next. So that's pretty popular, Likert scale. Usually, the Likert scale consists of around 5 to 9 points with a range of different answer options. And does anybody know what type of data you'll often get from a Likert scale? We've talked about the different scales of measurement. There's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio.
Interval?
Yeah, interval. Typically, the Likert scale does get interval level data. It can be constructed in such a way that you get ratio level data or ordinal, but usually you're rating attitude or agree to disagree, and most of the time that's not going to have a true 0 point that would be associated with the ratio scale of measurement. Another interesting little fact about a true Likert scale is that it always has an odd number of points. So the midpoint of the scale, if it is a true Likert scale, is going to be some neutral attitude. So if you have to take a stance on some topic and you're using a Likert scale, the midpoint would be that you were undecided on that particular topic. Or if you were agreeing or disagreeing with a statement, then the bottom of the scale might be strongly disagree, then go up a little bit, slightly disagree, then the middle point would be neither agree nor disagree, and then going up to strongly agree. Now, sometimes you'll see scales that use an even number of points, so it might have 4 points. And if that's the case, then it isn't actually a Likert scale, but sometimes they're just referred to as Likert type scales. So that's useful to know for when you're designing these things in the future. It's not a whole lot of people will harp on this, but you want to make sure that you're using the right terminology and not calling something a Likert scale if it's just Likert type. So if it doesn't have a neutral midpoint, or if it uses an even number of questions, it's just a Likert type scale. Right. Now I thought what would be useful at this point is to take a look at a survey that a lot of you have probably completed before, and that I hope a lot of you will be completing in the near future, which is the Student Opinion of Instruction Survey here at ECU. So I actually have a copy of this that we can look at. It seems appropriate because it's the end of the semester, and I sent an email out asking you all to fill this out. So you might have already seen this, but let's look at it in the light of what we have been talking about, survey construction.